They're collecting all kinds of data on us. The NSA is collecting data. They're militarizing the police.
The fusion centers. The fusion centers as well.
What are the fusion centers? I don't know if I know what fusion centers are.
They're in every state, and every state capital has a fusion center. And what that fusion center is responsible for is the collation of local data about citizens, and it's forwarded to the national database. Google it. Dear God, tell your audience to Google it. They need to understand what they're up against.
And so I did Google it, and so did Pat and Stu, and so now we probably lit up the boards on these fusion centers so they could come pick us up later. I don't know. Buck Sexton is here. He's our national security correspondent for TheBlaze. Buck, my head's going to explode. There's so much going on right now that we have built a cage for Americans. What's a fusion center?
Glenn, I used to work essentially in what was a fusion center, so I'm pretty familiar with them. The idea is in a post 9/11 world, you need to have full spectrum and data sharing. So that means that local law enforcement is picking up all kinds of stuff over the course of their investigations, and also just things that come up in the course of their doing business, not necessarily with any criminal predicate. And then they bring that data together with people who work at the federal agencies. They sit next to people who work at the federal agencies in these fusion centers.
Okay,
the idea being that maybe
this was because we have to tear down these walls and we have to talk to each other, et cetera, et cetera. So is it a bad place or a good place? What the hell? Don't give me anything else to worry about.
I think it's a pretty bad place. For one, you have fusion centers in places that have never suffered a terrorist attack, that are very unlikely to suffer a terrorist attack, and quite honestly, the fusion center in those places probably wouldn't be able to prevent a terrorist attack anyway if one were to happen. So you have them in all of these states. A lot of it has to do with the money, the federal funding that comes, particularly from the Department of Homeland Security, gives grants to places so that they can they get this money. Sometimes they use it for very strange purposes. I know of cases where terrorism funds have more or less been used to track livestock, but that's a discussion for another time. I mean, Glenn, the truth is that whenever you have local cops sitting next to federal officers and there's a free and open sharing of information between them, guess what? What can be picked up over the course of perhaps the early stages of a terrorism investigation can very easily be passed up or down, depending whether you're going up to the federal or down from the federal to the local. And now you've got people who are essentially getting caught up in criminal actions based upon the investigations of these fusion centers themselves. So there is a problem for privacy, for civil liberties, and for just how wide spectrum these centers are.
Okay, I only have a minute. I have to ask you this, and I'd like to actually have you on again later, maybe next week. I know we're going to do something on Beslan, but I'd like to talk to you about this. You remember when the president said we have to have a home security force, a homeland security force, just as prepared, just as well funded, and just as well armed as our U.S. military? And they only said it once, and people were called conspiracy theorists, you know, if they said, wait, what does that mean? I mean, we really are building a military force here in the United States, are we not?
Well, that makes it into my top 5 list of the scariest things President Obama has said, along with the future does not belong to those who slander the Prophet of Islam at the United Nations. That was a moment where I think they realized they overreached. But they are building a militarized police force, Glenn. They are essentially blurring any distinction between federal law enforcement and local law enforcement, which should be very clear lanes in the road for everyone to understand. And this can be turned into a turnkey tyranny very quickly.
All right. So